Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Africa Construction Law Podcast. My name is Yolanda Walker, and I'm a partner at DWF. And I'm really excited to be here in Nairobi with Paula Ochango, who is legal counsel for Mota Engil, Africa and Latin America. Before we begin, I'd just like to thank our sponsors, Soccer Tech Advisory, for sponsoring this podcast. Paula, so welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So you were part of the business development team at Mota Engil, Africa and Latin America. So tell me about your role in the business development team.
Okay. Mota Engil Group is an engineering and construction company that has a wide portfolio of projects from infrastructure, transport and logistics, energy, solar, oil and gas, and we also do environmental work through water treatment and waste treatment as well. So as you rightly said, I'm part of the business development department of Africa and Latin America. So my role, together with other colleagues in the legal team, is to support business developers and project managers. So we are supporting projects across the project cycle from the bidding, whether we are doing competitive bidding or privately initiated proposals, up until we get to financial close. So what that looks like on a daily basis is to negotiate consultancy agreements with our service providers, to more complex negotiations and review of contracts, project agreements and finance documents with lenders and government agencies. So that's just a nutshell of what we do.
Yeah, so it sounds really, really broad, from the type of projects that Mota Engil itself is involved in, right through to the type of contracts that you're looking at. You know, if you're going from solar to transport to road to infrastructure, your projects are really going to be varied. And so I imagine is your input.
It has been a huge learning curve for me, I would say personally. I've gotten to interact with professionals from different industries across the infrastructure space. We have done quite a number of projects, at least in the development stage, and participated in a lot of feasibility studies. So it enables me to see projects from their very initial stages and what would get the projects to financial close.
So your input at the beginning, and then would you assist with the implementation of the project as well?
Yeah, for sure. I'll give an example. We are doing the roads under the Kenya Annuity Roads program, which is a project that was launched sometime in 2015 as part of an agenda to make sure that there's 10,000 kilometers of roads spread across different areas of rural Kenya. So the roads have been divided into lots. We are doing lot 15 and lot 18, which are spread across different counties in Kenya. I joined the team when the project had already gotten to financial close. So my input is just kind of giving legal and regulatory advice in the implementation of the project. So we have already signed the project documents. We've gotten financial close. Now we already completed the construction stage, but I'm also giving advice on the more operational and maintenance and monitoring perspective.
So Mota Engil has many landmark projects, and actually really glad that you brought up the Kenyan Annuity Road program. That's it.
Yeah.
Because this is one of the landmark projects. In relation to that project specifically, what would you say have been the main challenges then?
I would say managing stakeholders, because you see, in a project like that, there are varied stakeholders with different interests sometimes. Of course, we all are interested in carrying out the implementation of the project, but sometimes the interests could be competing. So we have the sponsors, different shareholder groups, we have the contractors, we have the subcontractors, we have, insurers, other consultants that are managing the project. So managing all these stakeholder groups has been a bit of a challenge, but it's something that we learn. And we also have to now factor in contractual monitoring mechanisms so that we ensure that all the interests are taken care of.
It's filled with so many layers, that management piece, because you have, like you say, the contract interfaces that you have to manage, but then you're also managing competing interests when it comes to what when something goes wrong. So one way of resolving something might be one stakeholder's preferred route, and another way of resolving something might be another stakeholder. So I can imagine that's quite a balancing act that you're having to do.
We've learned as we move forward in the project is the value of building relationships with the different stakeholders, especially in this digital age. Sometimes you just have calls on Zoom and there's no that personal touch of that personal relationship. So going the extra mile in building the relationships, going to people's offices, actually making physical visits, arranging for board members of the different shareholder groups to actually come to site and meet with the contracting authority. It really goes a long way in relationship building. And in the end, we are able to resolve such instances where people have competing interests or different ways of solving problems. At the end of the day, it can just be as easy as sitting over a cup of tea or coffee and agreeing on the way forward.
Gosh, that's so true.
Yeah.
I mean, as a dispute lawyer, disputes are built on people not getting along and having an emphasis on, like you say, the basics, putting some people in a room as opposed to on Teams or in front of screens, or, keyboard warriors firing emails that can be interpreted in, an aggressive way. It is so simple, but it is so effective. Back to the Kenya Roads Annuity program. You mentioned we're in a digital age. We're also in an age where sustainability and ESG is becoming more and more of a focus, particularly for large international corporate companies like Mota Engil. What are the measures that have been put in place for sustainability for the Kenya Roads program, or any other project that Mota Engil is working on?
Yeah, I think sustainability goes to the root and the principles that Mota Engil as a group stands for. So that's the first point of call. But even looking at a bankability of projects, these ESG principles have to be embedded in the finance documents. So once they're embedded when you're negotiating the finance documents, we have to ensure that these ESG monitoring mechanisms are adhered to throughout the project cycle. Quarterly reports are issued. We have the ESG consultants visiting the sites and making assessments based on what they see on site, ensuring that the community is engaged because there's that social aspect of ESG as well. So ensuring that this policy is part of the group, number one. And number two is embedding this ESG, international ESG principles embedded in the contract, and being very proactive in managing and monitoring that they're actually adhered to as part of our reporting requirements.
Is that difficult, managing the adherence to ESG principles? Is there a measure of success or a measure of actually achieving that ESG goal? I think I've noticed that you can put contractual obligations on parties to commit to certain ESG principles, but then enforcement becomes something that you have to consider as well. How do you look at that?
I think before we even look at the enforcement bit, it's very important to educate the team first on the importance of these ESG principles, and not just something that is on paper that has to be ticked against a box. Educating the team about the importance of environmental conservation, gender equity in the employment of staff on site, safety principles, all these things, educating the team. And then once the team has that ingrained in them, it will just flow to the rest of the people on site and the community as well. So that's a big focus for us. We take this very seriously. We normally celebrate this World Safety Days. Environmental conservation is a big deal for us. So we look at it more than just monitoring and compliance in a contract, but actually doing it on site.
I really like that. So you're not just paying lip service to ESG, it's part of your culture as an organization.
Yeah.
And so because you as employees and the organization care about it, it's something that you will adhere to, but also ensure is adhered to in the way you operate.
Mm-hmm.
What's the financing behind the Kenya Annuity Road Program?
The funds are ring-fenced under the Roads Annuity Fund, which is funded by fuel levies. So a percentage of fuel levies come to that fund. And then once you get into the operations phase of the contract or the implementation phase of the contract, it's annuity payments. So these annuity payments are based on milestones to be achieved. And once those are achieved and these performance standards are met, you invoice to the contracting authority and the agreed payment is deposited to the project company's account. So it's a milestone-based annuity payment.
This sounds like it's been a really well-received project, a bankable project. It's a good news story. It's something that we should be celebrating that's coming out of East Africa.
I would say this project is, the aim is to expand the road networks, especially in rural areas. You've seen economies opening up, trade being facilitated, jobs being created. So it's a very attractive project. The impact is seen on the ground, and it's also a bankable project to the extent that the amount, as I told you, has been ring-fenced. So lenders have that kind of comfort.
That seems to be quite important, having for your lenders to have confidence in a project and there to be some kind of element of certainty or security in the investment. You yourself have a strong focus on putting together or structuring bankable projects. And that attracts the key investment that's necessary into East Africa and Latin America. What would you say are the key ingredients for a bankable project?
The key ingredients for me would be legal certainty and a stable regulatory environment. It really enhances investor confidence, knowing that there are clear legal frameworks, proper procurement laws, enforceability of contracts, the sanctity of contracts are respected, and the court system enforces arbitral awards because arbitration is the preferred mode in most construction projects. So that is definitely, I would say, the first ingredient to ensure bankability. The second one is risk allocation and mitigation. The key principle being that risk is allocated to the party that is best able to manage it. And in managing, we are looking at identification of risk, assessment of risk, mitigation, and monitoring. So if the risks are not allocated to the party that is best able to manage it, there's normally that risk of having cost overruns, regulatory delays, and things like that. So if risks are properly allocated, this gives investors and lenders a lot of confidence, and it also avoids delay in the procurement process and also implementation as well. The third ingredient I would say is preparation. A poorly prepared project, no matter how innovative, might struggle to get financing. Financiers would have to look at, proper feasibility studies, are ESG principles adhered to, what are the technical studies, are there traffic studies, for example, in a logistics and roads project, because this eventually has an impact on the returns. And, an investor would want to see, is this an environment where I can actually invest in and get my return back?
I think that's a really important point, and seldom considered in enough detail in terms of preparation. And I think it actually goes hand in hand with risk allocation to some extent. When you're doing the feasibility and the site investigations, you're getting the geotechnical input. It can be so vast in terms of what investigations ought to be done. And coming from seeing what happens when it goes wrong and the disputes where there wasn't enough investigation at the outset and certain information wasn't found out. It's a sad lesson to learn, or a hard lesson to learn, for example, when you've accepted that risk or that you're the party that's paying for that risk.
Yeah, it's interesting you see it from what would go wrong perspective, which is very useful because it now enables you to prepare better. It does make sense. And I realized when I have always worked in the corporate setting, even when I was working at a law firm, I realized that it was very useful for me to have friends in the litigation department because I used to ask them questions as to like, what is the worst case scenario? And then I kind of work backwards.
That's what should be done. You identify, what you are trying to avoid, and then you plan for evading that risk. So you mentioned preparation. So we had legal certainty, a clear regulatory system, risk allocation, and then anything else?
I think the last one, of course, there are several, and by the way, in no particular order, but I think the other important one is having a credible sponsor and just credible people on your team. It's very important to have contractors with the right experience, having experienced the different nuances in different markets, and being able to take on that challenge, because you find that some contractors may have worked in a different continent and different country, because every country has its own challenges. So having that credibility and experience and exposure and in-depth knowledge about how to implement projects is also very important.
What piece of advice would you give to a contractor that was entering the East African or the Latin American market for the first time, for example, to understand or to know when planning for a project in those markets?
To understand how the market works rather than impose what they have done in a previous project to that project, thinking that, we've done this before here and it worked, and kind of copy paste. So it would be important to understand, get local experts to advise on how that market works, how the regulatory environment works. There's some few cultural differences that, might not be obvious to someone who is not from that market, but are very important to, for example, when you're talking to government agencies and the different bureaucracy. So I think getting that local feel of how that market operates rather than impose their own preconceived notions or their own previous experience in a different market.
I love that. It's not a copy and paste job. It's
not at all.
Understand the context and work within that context. Be sensitive to the different nuances and the differences. Really, really good advice. So this is not our first meeting. Last year, we co-wrote an article together. And that article was on the pitfalls to avoid when it comes to East African energy projects. And in this article, we identified the cancellation of agreements as a risk to East African projects. I wanted to discuss that a bit more with you today.
I think the risk of cancellation is particularly prevalent in East African projects because of a combination of different factors. I would say maybe political, economic, and regulatory volatility. So you find that transition in governments or change in government priorities, they tend to look at the previous government and probably have the perception that a project was poorly negotiated or it was expensive. So they tend to start reviewing and cancelling or suspending that project. It has happened in Kenya, for example, where there has been a moratorium for quite a long time on PPAs, where government has had a lot of pressure to reassess the tariffs that are imposed on electricity. So basically that public pressure to reduce consumer tariffs, and then different government national priorities changing along the way, it obviously, it has an impact on how the risk of contracts being cancelled or suspended.
Yes, there's so much there, isn't there? The political, regulatory risk, change of government risk. And then within that, there's the changes that they will implement themselves as government, the changes of laws. We can see how quickly markets are impacted by laws, for example, that impact tariffs, and then supply chains and disruption that thereafter follows from that onto a project. How would parties go about reducing some of these risks, particularly when you started a project mid, for example, term of a current government, and there is concern that the incoming government might pause or cancel the project?
Yeah, I could think of a couple of ways. The first being having clear contractual protections. For example, you could embed in the contract change in law provisions that allow for adjustment in case of regulatory and policy shifts. And then you could also put in clear termination payment mechanisms so that in the event that the contract is terminated, the parties are also protected and they can get out their investment through termination payments. The other protection that I would recommend is to have political risk insurance.
Oh, yes.
There's multilateral agencies which offers good products in the event of termination, war, expropriation. The others is just engaging the stakeholders early, getting those different agencies, buying from different agencies, the ministries, and then aligning with the national development plans, ensuring that the project directly supports the government's policy objectives.
Yeah. It goes back as well to what we were saying earlier in terms of relationships, when you just mentioned engaging stakeholders early on. Just having those conversations just instills trust. And so much of what goes into the decision to cancel a project is the uncertainty, the lack of trust in the project itself, but the teams that are delivering the project, and having that regular catch up, that regular engagement and confidence from every party that's involved that, yes, we're committed to this project. We want to see it through. We're not going to use this as almost a way to establish a claim against you or vice versa. It keeps momentum, but often the immediate answer is, there's a problem, let's pause, let's cancel, we're not sure what this government's going to do. And that's such a shame, but there are mechanisms, as you say, that can reduce those risks. We also looked at payment arrears as another cause of disputes and risk that's presented to projects, particularly in East Africa. What would you say some of the measures are that parties can take to reduce this risk of payment, or rather non-payment, and reduce that risk in terms of it turning into a dispute later down the line as well?
Yeah, I'll just highlight a few. The first being having clear payment terms embedded in the contract, ensuring that there are deadlines for payment and invoicing, and also introducing penalties and interest in cases of late payment. The second one is introducing some security mechanisms in the contract, like requesting for letters of credit, escrow accounts, and payment guarantees, so that in the event that there are shortfalls in the utilities, then the parties won't be affected.
I can't agree with you more there. I've seen a lot of contracts when it's come to the dispute side. You've already delivered the project, there's an issue with payment, and certain protections aren't there that you would expect to be there. For example, like you mentioned, payment guarantees, bonds. When the issues happened, if you haven't got those contract obligations clearly set out, it's really difficult to navigate from there who's owed what and who should be paying what. Great. I'm going to move into something different now, and just because I'd like our subscribers and viewers to get to know you a little bit more. So I'm going to ask you some random questions and you just have to give one answer. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Beach or mountains?
Beach.
Book or film?
Book.
Smocha or Maya Pasua?
Oh, where'd you learn that? I'd say smocha.
Smocha?
Yeah.
Okay. Dancing or singing?
Dancing.
Yes. Glass half full or glass half empty?
Glass half full, anytime.
Chapati or mandazi?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I'd say chapati. Yeah.
Still or sparkling?
Sparkling. Yeah.
Afrobeats or pop music?
Afrobeats, anytime.
Emails or conversations?
conversations for sure.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
In your spare time, I see that you also volunteer and you've taken on the position of company secretary for Kenya Women and Children's Wellness Centre. Tell me more about this and your role in that.
It's a cause that is very dear to me. And the KWCWC was born out of the need to address domestic violence. So what we do at KWCWC is to provide support for domestic violence and gender-based violence survivors. We also do free medical aid to survivors of domestic and gender-based abuse, and also doing research so that it can influence policy and laws to support survivors of gender-based violence. My role as company secretary is, of course, to advise on the governance and legal aspects of the organization, but it also feels deeply fulfilling to be part of an organization that supports a cause that is dear to me and has a direct impact on the society around me.
Wow. So not only are you helping with infrastructure, you're helping with people's well-being and safety. And,
I mean, I'll tell you that I always wanted to be a human rights defender.
Wow.
But I realized I don't have the heart for it. But I realized that advocacy can come in different forms.
Brilliant, yeah.
Even in wearing my hat as an infrastructure expert. Ensuring that project delivery to the people on the ground, that's a form of advocacy. Using my free time to support in causes such as KWCWC, that's a form of advocacy. So it doesn't have to come in one hat that looks like, being a human rights defender and going to court. It can come in several ways as long as you fully immerse yourself in the role that you are playing. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're effective in that, both in the infrastructure role, but also for your community as well.
I try.
Well, Paula, it's been a real pleasure speaking to you today here in Nairobi. Thank you for joining the Acl Podcast. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. This was really nice. Asante sana.